Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Healing Art After Hours. I'm Shauna Robeson with Creating Space Coastal, and in this video, I'm going to be introducing a color wheel. I'm going to basically tell you how to use this color wheel. It's great to have, so I'll do a little tour of how to use that. And also, we're going to create our own color wheel. You can use any medium that you want. Mine is actually, I colored the emotion wheel that we did a couple weeks ago, so you'll probably recognize this design, and I just went ahead and colored it. So if you want to see how we did that, stay tuned. Let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is, like I said, I'm going to go through and just give a little tour of the color wheel and what you can, how it can help you. And there are probably more things than even I'm showing, but it'll be a good start. So it's two-sided. So if you don't have one, it's two-sided, and there is a rotating wheel and then the stationary wheel, which is larger. And then on the back side, there's also another rotating wheel. So there's two rotating wheels, front and back. And it has basically a color wheel, which is the primary colors. Primary colors are red, yellow, and blue, which are equidistant from each other on the wheel. And what primary colors mean is they just mean that they're the base colors. There's no colors that you can mix together to create the basic blue, red, or yellow. Now you can add colors to create different hues of blue, but to get the basic neutral blue, yellow, and red, there's no way to create that without having that color. So that's why they're called primary colors. And if you mix two primary colors together, so in this case, it's red and yellow, you get a secondary color, and that's the orange, right? And then if you mix yellow and blue, you get green. And those are also equidistant on the wheel. And then if you mix blue and red, you get violet, okay? Now those are secondary colors because you're mixing two primary colors to get them. And then if you mix a primary color with a secondary color, you get a tertiary color, or the third level of the color. So for example, red and orange makes a red orange. So if you see any of those hyphenated color names, those are typically the tertiary colors, okay? So that's what that terminology means. So this is, and of course you can continue going on from there. If you add the red to red orange, you're going to get red, red, orange, right? It's just going to keep moving closer and closer to the color red. And there's really a full spectrum of color that you can get of red, orange, all the way until you get to the neutral red. And then as you start moving towards the other direction, you start adding blue, you can move all the way through the spectrum until you get to blue, okay? Now, that brings me to the temperature. There are warmer colors and cooler colors. Now, if you think about warm, like fire, that's a good example. You think yellows, oranges, and reds, the color of fire. And if you think of cool, you think of water, you think more of the blue, violets, and greens, right? Like the aquas and stuff. So this side of the wheel is more the warmer colors, and this side of the wheel is more the cooler colors. And the warmer colors come out at you. They pop kind of, and the cool colors recede. So when we create like shadows and things, we think about shading or darkening the color. That makes it appear to go further away from us. The cooler it is or the darker it is, right? It looks like it's receding. Whereas the brighter it is, the more vibrant, it looks like it's coming up at you. They use advancing colors. So reds, oranges, and yellows. And that actually has the description right here. Primary colors, secondary, tertiary, warm, cool. And then on the other side, it talks about the difference between color, hue, and value. So you guys can read that, but it does explain that. So when you see that terminology on something, then you can say, okay, now I understand what's the difference between, because color and hue kind of gets a little bit confusing, right? And the value is the relative lightness or darkness. I am going to bring that up because it does have a value scale. Now, the value scale that they have is in grayscale, because it's easier to see that gradation in the gray. And then what you can do is you rotate this around. Let's say you're trying to figure out what is the value that's like how much contrast, right? That you're going to use that for contrasting. How much value is this blue violet? And I can rotate this around. And if I squint, the colors start to, it's hard to tell the two, you can kind of see that they blend together. So if you look at this value wheel and then you squint your eyes, the one that looks the closest to that is the one that that shares that value. So that's how you can use the value scale. Some value scales have like a hole punched in it so you can lay it on top. But again, if you just squint, you can kind of see that, oh, that one doesn't show up as much when I squint compared to this color, so it shares that value. The next one is intensity. So that's purity of the color. And we're going to be, when we do our color wheel, we're going to create a gradation of intensity. So this is full saturation of the pigment, and then lighter and lighter, we're letting more and more of the light of the paper show through. So, so in this case, for just this one color, the intensity is higher here, but some colors have more intensity than other colors. Like this is a more subdued color than this. So it's just more vibrant of a color. So it's just the quality of the color that you can use for contrasting to create dimension in your art. The tint, tone, and shade. So tint is the color, any color that you add white to. So if I added some white to the red, now I think it's on the back. Yes. So on the back of this, it has a scale for tint, tone, and shade. And so each of these rungs on this wheel is a variation of that. So if I, for example, added to red, orange, if I added white, I'm going to get a tint. So it's kind of a pastel version of that. If I add gray, you're going to get a really kind of muted grayish version of that, which might work well if you're trying to do like a, you know, like it's in the shade or it's in the darker area. But it's really just like you've heard tone it down. It's really going to create your more subtle, more subdued colors. So toning it down is adding some gray. Then you can also add black, like if you really want to make it look like it's in the shade. So this might be in the sunlight, and then this area you add a little bit of black and it's in the shade. Now you can also, and we'll talk about that in a minute, you can also use complementary colors to create a shade type color as well. But I'm not gonna confuse you right now, but I'll mention that in just a minute. So if you add white, if you add gray, or if you add black, you're gonna get these three different variations of that color. And then the neutral gray would be just mixing, if you mix black and white together. Now, what you'll find when you're looking at colors, paints, or whatever it is you're doing, that there are different whites and different blacks even. Some blacks are made with cooler shades, some are made with warmer shades. If you diluted it down, you might even see, you might see like a green tinge to it, or maybe a brown tinge to it. So some, you know, they're not all created equal. It just depends on what they're mixed together with. So just make sure that you are aware of that. You're gonna get, you know, if you have a fairly neutral black and a fairly neutral white, you're going to get a neutral gray. Okay, and then on, as I was saying, let's see, I got that. I want to cover everything. Okay, here they have basically the primary colors plus neutrals, and they shows you if I add, see how this wheel has the primary colors plus white and black. So what it does is it shows you if I add red to any of these colors, what's in this window is the color I'm going to get. So this is basically red, red, violet, right? Because you're mixing red with red, violet. So it's moving in the direction of red. If I add red to violet, I'm getting this red violet, which is basically this, right? Because this is the same thing. It's mixing the violet plus the red. So this color is actually the same. If I add red to blue violet, I get this color. So this just shows you if I add any of these colors to any of the colors on the wheel, what you're going to get. And then if I add white, again, that's going to be the same thing as what you found over here with the tint. But if you add white to any of these colors, it's going to show you basically the pastel version of that color. And this is the same thing. It's going to show you the shade version that you get by adding black. So that's what that part does. And then on this side, it also talks about the different palettes that you might use. So different color schemes, there are several options that you have. Monochromatic is when you have really closely related colors. So they might all be different shades or tones of beige or red or whatever that is. So if I used all of these colors, for example, I had a painting and I used all of these, that's basically a monochromatic palette because I'm using variations of this color. Analogous is when you use colors that are next door to each other on the wheel. And you can use, I would say, well, this says actually, I think it says up to 5, but if you start using more than that, you're going to start getting into like opposing colors. So, but generally, if I'm trying to pick a color palette and I want them to be pretty safe, I want to make sure I'm not going to get mud, then I'll say pick 3 colors that are next to each other on the wheel, and that's pretty safe. And that can be, it can be these 3 colors, it can be these 3 colors, it can really be any 3 colors. And it's just, those are very harmonious. The monochromatic and the analogous are very harmonious colors. It's very calm and relaxing because there's not a lot of contrast in the color itself. Now, if you want really higher contrast in the pigment, that's when you would go for the complementary colors. And the complementary colors are colors that are opposite on the wheel. So red, orange, and blue, green are an example of that. And if you do mix those together, if you mix a complementary color together, you get they basically kind of neutralize each other and create a shade of gray, some shade of gray. So you have to be careful if you're using transparent mediums. If you don't want to mute it or subdue a color, then you want to be careful not to layer those on top of each other. But there may be times when you do want to do that, and that's okay. Again, if you're trying to tone it down or subdue it, all you'd have to do is add a little bit of this color to it, and that's going to do the same thing. It's going to tone this color down a little bit. And as long as you're just adding a little bit, it's not going to completely go to gray. If you just add a tad, it's going to keep the orange, but it's just going to tone it down. All right, and then there's the different palettes. So how you use this wheel, you can see these different palettes here. So it shows the arrows across is the complementary. So if I point to any color on the wheel and I want to see the complementary, all I have to do is look over here across the wheel. And actually, if you look on this edge, I don't know if I can, it says complementary. So wherever I'm pointing this is the arrow that I'm going to be pointing to. Wherever I point that, whatever is here is the complementary color. And the other areas have it written too. So here would be a triadic color and a triadic color for this color here. So this is where I point the wheel, and then I can look either here. This shows where it is as well. This is a triad, but it also is written here. And then this is a split complementary, these two, and it's written again right here, but you can also see it here. So wherever I point this arrow, I can figure out my split complementary palette by just following this triangle and seeing what 2 sets of colors are here. And they also have the tetrad. There's 2 different types of tetrad, the rectangle and then the square. And here they don't have the tetrad because those can be different, but I noticed that they had written those other ones there. So that's helpful. Now, they give different moods. I would say experiment. Do, like, you know, those lotus exercises that I have in my free with my supply list. Try out these different color palettes and see what you think of those. You know, maybe there's one that speaks to you. Maybe you really like analogous, or maybe you really like the split complementary, but you really don't like this tetrad. So try them out and see what kind of, you know, how that feels to you. You can also pay attention to what types of things you have around the house. You can look at your clothing to get an idea of what color palettes are in there, and then see if you can figure out what they are by looking at this and saying, okay, what color palette is what I'm wearing. Now I'm wearing pretty analogous colors right now because I have teal. Actually, it does have some orange in it too, so it's maybe it's a split. Let me see what it is. It has some orange, and then it has, let's go with, it's kind of a yellow orange. It doesn't even look like one of these because really, oh no, maybe it's the tetrad. Yeah, it looks like it could be one of these tetrads. So anyway, see if you can figure out your color palettes for things that you have around the house. Okay, now I want to show you just how to create a wheel. This is an example of a watercolor wheel that I created. And again, I would suggest mixing the colors in your palette and then put them on. And then what I did here is I just added a little bit of water, and then I just put it here, and then I add a little more water and put it here. So I made a gradient. Now I think for my emotion wheel, I'm going to do it opposite of that. So you can decide how you want to do it, because for the emotion wheel, because this is what I'm going to be coloring, we did it where the inside circles was the most intense. So I'm going to make that the most intense color for this purpose, but you can do it either direction you want. Okay, to make the wheel, the basic way to make any wheel, first you got to decide how many pie pieces you want. So there is a little bit of math. In this case, I want 12 pie pieces because I want the primary colors, secondary, and tertiary colors. And you can go as many as you want. If you want to add the next level, you just can count that out and make it split it up as much as you want. So you can make it as big as you want, but I'm just going to suggest doing 12. I think for my emotion wheel, it's just 8. So 360 is the number of degrees in a circle. So if I'm looking at a circle, so I'm just going to divide that up into 12 pieces. So 30 degrees is how much each of my pie slices, how many degrees wide those are going to be. Okay. And that's important because you need to know where to mark out your pie pieces. So the first thing I'm going to do is just create a center point. And then from there, I can create some crosshairs. So I want it to be, well, actually what I'm going to do is start with this. I'm going to use my, if you don't, actually I'm going to show you how to do it without this. Yeah, I'm going to show you how to do it without this. So if I don't have the protractor, I'm just going to create a horizontal line. And then I'm going to eyeball to my best of my ability, perpendicular line across that. Okay, but then I need each of these quadrants to be divided into 3 sections. So I can't just go in the middle of here. I have to actually do 1/3. So what I can do is I can try to find a point where I can divide it up into 3 pieces. Like I'm using inches. I want to try to, I'm kind of eyeballing it, but I want to try to get to the correct place on, you know, that's equidistant on each side, but I'm going to do my best. So let's see if it works. So I want this section and this section. So we'll see. It may or may not work. Or you can just, like I said, eyeball. You can try to eyeball it, but it's a little tricky. That's what this is good for, because then you can actually mark the exact, degrees. But if you don't have that, all is not lost. They don't have to be perfect either, because we're not, we're just trying to make a color wheel. So you're going to still have enough pieces to do what you need to do, even if they're not exactly the same size. Okay. So I divided that into 3 pieces, and now I'm going to try to divide this side into 3 as best as I can. All right, then now you can leave it in pencil if you want, or you can do it in marker afterwards. I would say, it might look nice to do it in marker. So, once you get your whole wheel done, you could go over it with marker just to get more permanent, and it'll show up a little bit better. Now at this point, if I didn't have a compass, I would use a compass to just create my rings. So if you have one and you know how to use it, you can do that. Basically, you just choose the size you want, you put the point in the center, and then you rotate it around. So that's the simple, and then you just can go larger and larger. Now, how to decide how much you want to go is you can use the ruler to mark out how big you want your rungs to be, and then you can put the points of this wherever you want to make sure it's the size. So if I wanted to go, just do an example, if I wanted to go an inch from that center line out, I could just put my point where I want it to go and mark there. And let's say I can mark another inch and another inch. So then I just from the center, I could go ahead and put my lead where I want it to go. And then I just mark it out. And then keep going from there. Okay, then the other thing you can do if you don't have that is you can just use a round object, and you want to start with the biggest object you're going to use. Well, let's say I want to use this. This one actually has a hole in the middle, so I can see where the center is. If you're going to have to use that, you probably want to start with your circles first, because it's going to be harder to see where you put the circle. And then you can draw your smaller circles. That's about that size. So you want to have at least 3 sections, so you can do the 3 intensities of your color. Okay. Are there any questions about creating that? And then I would just mark it in with marker if you want to, or you could do that later too. You could do your colors first, and then the problem with that though is if you're using wax pencils and you get color on these lines, it's going to be harder to mark them with markers after you use the wax. So if you want to use the markers, I would say mark it before you color if you're using wax. So now I'm going to show you the actual color mixing side of it. So I'm going to basically follow this color wheel, but I want to do it by mixing. So I'm going to be mixing the colors to get my secondary color, or this would be the secondary color. And I'm going to try to use my primaries and then my secondaries. So I'm going to start with the joy, which is here is yellow. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is look through my colored pencils. Let me pull this out. I'm going to look through my colored pencils and try to find the most neutral of each of those primary colors that I have. Now, I always make a color chart with whatever pencils or anything that I have. So I'm going to look here because it's hard to tell by looking at, these aren't always matching. The outside color of the pencils don't always match the lead very well. So sometimes it's hard to tell, but you can see what they look like when you look at when you do swatches. So I'm going to pick the most neutral yellow that I have. I'm going to go with this 107. That's pretty vibrant, but it's not too warm or too cool. If it started to look a little greenish, then that's moving away from the neutral. If it's starting to look a little orangish. So those are the two directions it would go. So this looks pretty good. And then I want red. I think this, you can see that 219. This looks like a fairly neutral color. I don't know if you guys can see that in. Let me see if I can get that to. So see how this compared to whatever else I have, the color's a little bit, it's hard to tell in the camera, I think, because this looks really almost salmon in real life. So I'm going to go with this 219. And you have to work with what you have. You may not have a very neutral color, but it's what you have. So go with as neutral as you got. And then I want blue, something blue. I think this 151 looks pretty good. It's like a pretty, I mean, when you think of primary colors, like back in kindergarten, that's what you're looking for. The closest to that primary 151. Okay. So these are my 3 primary colors. And I'm gonna not use any other colors. I'm gonna try to do all of my mixing on the paper. So we'll see how that goes. Now, what you wanna try to do is mix them as evenly as possible. So you're trying to get, when you're doing your secondary color, you're trying to get sort of equal parts of the 2 colors. Right, so just keep that in mind. You don't want to have, if you lay too much of one color down or the other color, you might start leaning towards one or the other. So you do want to try to get kind of an even layer of each of those colors, which can be tricky. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. I really have 16 here. So I think what I'm going to do is start with my primaries, go to my secondaries, and then do my tertiaries, and then see what I have left to go between. Because this is not the same as a typical color wheel. This one has 16 pie pieces, so it's going to be a little bit different. But for you, if you're doing 12, you're going to start with the primary color, and then I would say fill, if you know where mark where they go, then just do all your primaries, and then you can start mixing your primaries with your secondaries. So in this case, I'm mixing the yellow and the red together to get this color. I'm not mixing those together to get this color. What I'm going to be doing is mixing basically this color, which is a mix of these 2. So if you think of it as 1 part red and 1 part yellow, like a recipe, this is one part of each. Now this one is already 1 part yellow, 1 part red. If I add red, it's basically 2 parts red, 1 part yellow. Does that make sense? Okay, and then the same thing goes over here. This is yellow plus red. So if I add yellow, now it's 2 parts yellow, 1 part red. So as you're laying down pencil, you're going to think of the same thing. You're going to try to, lay down the right recipe. Now I do have to think about that a little bit because I should maybe in pencil mark where my primaries are because this is a little different wheel than I'm used to working with. Because like if you look at this, it's got 2 shades of green. but I kind of need to know how many mixing I'm going to be doing in between. So it's a little trickier if you're doing the emotion wheel. So I'm going to start with the easy thing, which is just putting in my yellow. And if you're working on the emotion wheel, just stay with me. I'm going to try to walk us all through it. Now, what I'm also going to do is, because my intensity is higher towards the center, towards the core of the wheel, I'm going to put more layers of the pigment. I'm going to concentrate the color in the center and then do a lower, lighter concentration as I move out, which in this case just means I'm letting more of the white show through. So what I'll do is an even coat all the way across, and then I'll add another layer onto these two, and then I'll add a third layer onto that one. That's how I'll do it with pencil. Does that make sense? So now I have a very pale version. This would be a tone, or wait, a tint, sorry, because I'm letting the white show through so it lightens my color. This is going to be my medium intensity and then my high intensity. Okay. Now I need to figure out where to put my other primary colors. So give me just a second while I sort this wheel out. I think I'm going to do this, my primary colors here. So I'm going to make this my blue, and then I'll make this my red, and then I'll just mix within those groups. Okay, so I'm going to do my primary. I think I decided to do my primary blue here. So I'm going to do the same thing where I just lay a layer all over the whole thing. Okay. Now, if I think about how I'm going to get these other colors, let's see, I've got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so this is halfway between these two colors. So this is going to be my secondary color right here. This is going to be my yellow and my blue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and lay down a layer of my blue, because I want my blue first, the darker color. And in this case, I can make it a little bit darker if I want to do the 3, because this isn't divided by 3, these colors over here, these petals. But I can still make a gradient from the bottom to the top if I want, so I might do that. So I'm going to do an all over color, and then I'm just going to maybe add a little bit more blue there. And now I'm going to add my yellow, and let's see if I get green. Maybe or maybe not. Look at that, I'm getting some green. Okay, so that's my green. Now I'm going to this is the secondary color between my blue and my red. So that's where I'm going to put that. And the blue I think of as a little darker color. So I'm going to go ahead and put the blue down first. Now I have all of my primary colors and my secondary colors, and now I'm just going to basically go through and fill in based on what's there. So this right here is going to be a combination of this, which is red and blue, and with another dose of red. So it's basically 1 blue and 2 reds. That's the recipe of that. So 1 blue, 2 reds. All right, so now out of 3 colors, we got a whole range of colors. Now I'm going to show you some different ways that you can do a little bit deeper blending. The first way is to use one of the colors that you're using. So for example, In this case, because I'm doing color mixing, I think that that's not the best way to do it, but I could just press a little bit harder and burnish with the yellow, and that's gonna basically smooth out my colors. But again, I want to be cautious in this particular case because I'm trying to keep my color mixes correct. So I don't necessarily want to use more color, but that's one way you can do it. Another way you can do it is with a blender pen, and I talked about that before. It's just basically a colorless, it's just made up of the binder part of a colored pencil. Make sure it's clean if you've used it before, that doesn't have any pigment on it. But then I'm just going to go over what I've already laid down and then just press a little bit harder this time and just get it to blend that color. Let me see if I can get it a little closer so you can see. See the difference? So just right there, see how I just got it smoother? You basically are filling in those valleys of the paper. You're smushing the pigment into those spaces, pressing that tooth down a little bit sometimes as well. I'm trying not to press too hard, but see how much smoother that looks and blended that looks compared to the other ones. And so
Does the blender pencil have anything at the end, Shauna, or is it just a?
Yeah, it has a little lead piece, but it's just a colorless. It looks white. But and this one I believe is wax based, even though I'm using it with my oil. I don't have an oil based one, so it seems to work fine. And this is more of a mechanical blending. It maybe is putting down a little bit of wax too in this case, but it's and it's a really it's kind of hard tip, so it really moves that, presses down that pigment. So that's another option. And just see how much smoother and blended that is compared. Okay, another thing you can use is just a blending stump. So this is pure mechanical. There's nothing you're adding to it. You're just basically pressing it down and mixing it in that way. I'm going to do that with this one. I don't think it works quite as well as the blender pencil for this particular. It might work better for the wax pencils, but I'm not really getting as much mixing as I did with the blender pencil. And another thing you can do now, I do think, even though with wax pencils you can use alcohol marker, like a clear alcohol marker. It does lift some of the pigment, so you have to be careful, but I think I tried it on this and it did work. Make sure that I don't have any leftover pigment on it, but I'm going to go ahead and just try it to show. Let's see if that helps with this one that I already tried. Let's see, that just smooths it right out. So yeah, that works pretty well. That's more of a chemical blending. And then you can also use like a spirits when you're doing with oil. You can use, mineral spirits, I think is one of them. There's the different solvents that you can use. See, I'm going to use this bigger section. And again, before I use it, I'm going to make sure I'm wiping it off because there might be pigment on it from the last time. So be aware though, if you use the alcohol, it might go through. So it's always a good idea to put a protector underneath. Let me just do that. Just to make sure it doesn't go through. Right. And then you have to be careful also if you've used alcohol-based markers, like the black markers, it might lift some of that too. So chemicals, you have to kind of be aware of that. So I'm being careful not to go right over the words just in case. And then I could play around with other, these other areas, or I could just leave them as they are. I kind of like, I feel like I want to do something. I think I want to do a gradient here. Yes, I think I want to do that. So let's start with blue in the center. I'm gonna make like a, and then so adding my red. It's gonna make kind of a rainbow gradient. And the yellow. I think the thing that's really cool about this exercise is just seeing how many colors. If I only had 3 pencils in my palette, look what all I could do. It's pretty magical. So you could take 3 different, a different blue, a different yellow, a different red, and do this whole thing again and get even a number of other colors because you're doing different shades of them. So have fun, play with color wheels. Color can impact so much in our lives. So we should celebrate it. All right, I think I'm gonna leave these guys. I think I want to leave those not colored. All right, I think I'm gonna go ahead and stop there for now. Thank you everyone so much for joining me for this episode of Healing Art After Hours. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you find this content helpful. And as always, happy creating. Bye.